This was inevitable as Andre Drummond is set to return to the Philadelphia 76ers after exercising his $5 million player option. While it was a disastrous season from start to finish, with Drummond surely not being a part of that solution here, we are running it back for one more season on a decision that Drummond had full control over. Doing a breakdown what this means for the entire Sixers roster, how the front court sort of projects, and if Drummond will ultimately end the year in a Sixers uniform, which I think is the better question. Now, before I dive fully into things, do want to remind you guys, as always, to make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. At this point in time, 68.3% of you guys watching these videos have not subscribed to us here at Sixers Digest just yet. Appreciate the support for everyone, and we are just getting started on this offseason, but the chips are beginning to fall. Now, we got this announcement. First to the scene was Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype, who tweets, just in, the Philadelphia 76ers' Andre Drummond will exercise his $5 million player option for the 25-26 season, league sources told Hoops Hype. During his career, Drummond has been an All-NBA selection in 2016, a two-time All-Star, and a four-time rebounding champion. Now, the problem with those accolades there is I don't think that is no longer the player that is Andre Drummond. It is disappointing to say, but it feels like he's aged 40 years since the time that he left the Sixers the first time. Now, with all this being said, I do want to be fair to Andre here, that it was a disastrous season by every single measurement, every single metric, every single outlook last year for how things went down. And to be fair to him completely, he did battle injuries as well. That this was a guy that was sidelined for a significant portion of time, battled a toe issue, which he was pretty open about how much that impacted him, just being weird from like a movement standpoint. And to give the full stats for what he brought to the table last year, he averaged 7.3 points per game, 7.8 rebounds, 1.0 steal, shot 15% from three. There was an uptick in three-point attempts, 50% from the field. And I will say some of those lifeless games down the stretch, that some of my biggest joy in watching the Sixers last year was the Andre Drummond three-pointer. So a little bit of appreciation there. Andre Drummond is a good dude, a guy that wants to be around the organization. And for him, I think his decision was simple. He enjoys Philadelphia, and straight up, his market value is not $5 million right now. Now, the critique cannot come on Daryl Morey for this specific decision here. The Drummond was in full control. He held the cards. That is what a player option is. You can critique dating back to Morey giving him this control, and there are two other guys that will play into this. So dive into the cap sheet a little bit here, that we can see Drummond already accounted for and upgraded to a standard contract with those two green little symbols there on Kelly Oubre Jr., on Eric Gordon, under very similar circumstances there. Now, Oubre is another guy that's been pretty open on his desire to be back, and the expectation is that he will opt into that deal. Gordon, a bit more complicated there, as there is a way for a little bit of a we help you, you help me kind of thing, where he opts out of that player option and then re-signs for the veterans minimum, which will actually be a pay raise for him because of the salary cap increase there. So just something to keep in mind moving forward. But to talk about Drummond in particular, as I mentioned, not a surprise here that shortly after the season, in his exit press conference, he was asked, and per Kai Carlin of Sixers Wire says Andre Drummond has a player option for next year, and he said he plans to be a 76er next year. He wants to help this team win at the highest level. And per Derek Bodner of PHLY Sports says, Andre Drummond, who has a player option for next season, quote, my plan is to be back. So again, we kind of knew this was the case. Now, what I will throw in the mix here is this also means he is now eligible to be traded. That while it was under his control that he starts the season in Philadelphia, it is no longer in his control that he ends here. But when talking about this Sixers team as a whole, I do want to be open-minded in giving Andre Drummond a second chance here. We obviously saw what he brought as a high-level contributor during his first go in Philadelphia. I do think age has caught up to him to an extent, but maybe it was that bothersome toe injury that really weighed down his production last year. And to put those into context, a little bit deeper dive at the stats. Shout out to Jacob Moreno, always on top of things. And he tweets out, of course, the 7.3 points, the 7.8 rebounds, but a 22.4% rebounding percentage, which is the lowest since 2013-14. 50% field goals, 53.5% true shooting, which is not great for a big man, to be honest there, and a minus 10.5 on off swing. The Sixers were worse when Andre Drummond was on the floor, and that is not a great sign there. But again, I do want to be open-minded. I do want to be a bit positive here, and we could always see a world where Daryl Morey packages this contract in some sort of trade. But looking at the Sixers front court overall, did want to go back to pulling up the roster as a whole, and you can kind of see some of these names. This is per StatMuse here, not complete or filled out, but you can see the top names on the roster. VJ Edgecombe, Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain, Kelly Oubre, Andre Drummond, Eric Gordon, Adem Bona, with Jared Butler and Lonnie Walker. Now, a couple other factors. The Sixers did decline their team option on Jared Butler. They're going to dive into the implications of that in a video dropping tomorrow, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But to keep it on Drummond in the front court here, the Sixers still have questions to answer. Now, the million-dollar question that will really base everything around the season is the status of Joel Embiid. We got a vague update from Daryl Morey, frankly, one that was not very convincing whatsoever after the draft, that he was asked about the status of Joel Embiid, and all we got out of Daryl was that he's on schedule, he's met with doctors, everything is healing up and recovering as expected here, and he was asked directly of will Joel Embiid be ready for training camp, to which his response was, yeah, he should be good around that time. Right around that time was the direct quote from Daryl Morey. Not something that I love to hear, and we're just putting this in the context of the injury that he was dealing with, the injury that he had surgery for, and we can even be unclear if there was even that, because there was the miscommunication between Joel Embiid specifically and the team doctors here. This was a 6-week recovery injury. We are past that point. We are more than 2 months out since that he went under the knife there, and it is a bit concerning to me that we do not have a more concrete idea of what the whole situation is. Now, with that being said, I understand the Sixers are being tight-lipped, and we've kind of been onto this track for several years to this point, that any injury statuses with Joel Embiid are going to be kept under close wraps there, that he individually is pretty sensitive to that type of medical information being out to the public. I personally feel that, dude, you're a professional athlete. That's sort of what comes with the territory here, but nonetheless, I do think the team needs to, I guess, just respect that opinion here and deal with it, because Joel is still their guy, and that's kind of how they got to operate. But that brings in more of the value of the backup center position and the spot that's going to be a starting center position on who knows how often, certainly to some extent this year. Can Drummond step in and fill those shoes in a second season? That is the question that the Sixers need to evaluate themselves, and to their credit, they are taking other precautions to give themselves other options. They drafted Janai Broome with the 35th overall pick, and I've been quite vocal on here. Not the biggest Janai Broome fan by any means, but I will say, dove back into the film a little bit, and I came away a bit more impressed than I initially was. That I'm still very skeptical of how he can maintain or be evident at the NBA level from an athletic standpoint there. I wish that there was more juice in the way that he moves around the court, more verticality to his game, but he's got some really good basketball feel, man. A good passer for his size, a guy that has played with a traditional big man at Auburn before, which is intriguing. He's going to give Drummond a run for his money for being the best rebounder on the team, which is an accolade that Drummond wants to be open. And let's not also forget about Adem Bona, who showed some really promising flashes. Now, he's still very raw. He's all energy. He's going to have foul issues. There will be growing pains with Bona. But for a guy that is just the bare bones, lob catching, blocking shots, getting rebounds type of big man, that is what Bona projects as, and what I expect him to fill moving forward. So that's another option that they have on the table for that. I still think there is more work to be done. A guy that I think would be perfect is some sort of mold between a power forward and center. Someone very similar to Gershon Yabusele, who unfortunately it tends to continue to trend more and more in the direction of there will be no way to re-sign him here. But I would like a couple options for the positional breakdown there. But nonetheless, Drummond is expected to be a part of that fix. For the short term, we will welcome him back in Philadelphia and see if this is to stay. I do think that most likely it's probably not going to be a trade in the short term, and it would be more closer to the deadline type of thing when I would expect him to be packaged there. I think the uncertainty with Joel Embiid and not knowing how soon he'll be available, how much he'll be available, factored into all these other circumstances here. I think trading away a big man who has some sort of pedigree doesn't make a ton of sense from the Sixers angle at this stage of the game. Now, they're going to do the battle against the cap. He's not the guy that is the biggest culprit of that. Frankly, if we're talking about packaging things and to pull up these numbers once again, that I think Kelly Oubre's $8 million plus sort of contract is one that is going to be way more valuable in terms of ducking things or trying to get under certain aprons and giving ourselves the most financial flexibility possible. But Oubre still has to full out make that decision himself. He's also been a guy quite expressive in wanting to be back in Philadelphia, but we'll see when he officially signs on the dotted line what that timeline looks like and how Daryl Morey feels about that moving forward. To his credit, I know Oubre has a lot of haters in the comments here. They need high-level rebounding, and when looking at this roster, he is a guy that at the wing position does commit to that in a way that I do think this team needs. So we are still at the beginning phases of kind of orchestrating this entire team. Obviously, we have the general core with 12 players listed on this, and this not even being VJ Edgecombe or Janai Broome signed to this point. I also think there's a chance where Janai Broome gets a two-way, which gives them a little bit of flexibility. I don't think he's going to benefit too much from playing in the G League, as he's a pretty finished product and polished piece at this stage in the game, but that would give them a bit more roster flexibility, so something to keep an eye on that as well. At this current stage in the game, they have one open two-way slot, so that'll be another roster situation to monitor there. But to Andre Drummond, welcome back to Philadelphia. I hope this year goes better than last. And we will see if ultimately his production or that $5 million to potentially use as a trade matcher or to match a salary in a deal ends up being more valuable to this Sixers team. But he is back in the Sixers uniform, and we should welcome him with open arms. So I'm going to continue to do that in the short term there. One more time, appreciate you guys for tuning into this video here, and do want to make sure one more time that you are hitting that subscribe button. Only 31.7% of you guys watching have to this point. Want to keep growing this Sixers Digest family as large as possible, as there are better days ahead, more exciting times for this franchise, and we're gonna be all over it from start to finish. So appreciate you guys for tuning in this video here. Make sure you're hitting a like if you have not already, dropping your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be back. Talk with you next time. Peace.